So welcome tonight to a great presentation. For many of you, this might be like the beginning of the college application process, and your parents maybe made you sign up and you're thinking, "Oh, it's only March." But given what's going on in the world and given that a lot of schools are paused right now and sports are paused, you're showing up tonight, and I hope we're really going to help you get started and get thinking, because that's what tonight's really about. It's just about thinking about who you are and how you can bring those ideas into your essays. So my name is Rachel Beck, and I'm a senior consultant at collegeMission. I also have on the line from Poets&Quants, Nathan Allen. He's going to help me out along the way. Just so you know a little background about me, I'm a former journalist. I was a reporter, editor, and columnist for the Associated Press, which is the world's largest news organization, for nearly 2 decades. I also attended Columbia School of Journalism and Columbia Business School, so I have a real strong writing and editing background and also some analytical skills as well. I've spent decades helping people work on their applications, and now I get to do this for a job, and I love it. I love telling stories. As a journalist, I love telling stories, and now as an admissions consultant, I love doing it too. So I hope you get a lot out of this evening. So here's our roadmap for tonight. First, we're going to talk about where do you even begin, because you're probably thinking like, I don't even know where to begin. This whole thing is scary. They keep talking about a common application essay. What is that? So we're going to talk about that. Then we're going to talk about where does all this thinking lead you, this word brainstorming that you're probably going to hear a lot of over the next 6 months or so. Then I'm going to help you understand what writing effective essays look like. Again, tonight is about thinking, not necessarily about executing, but we're going to help you begin to think about how you're going to write effectively. And then we're going to take a look at 2 essays that I think are pretty effective, but I want to hear your take too. Then I'll tell you a little bit more about collegeMission, and I'll take some questions. So where do I begin? So you have to remember something. The colleges get a lot of material about you, right? There's going to be a lot of different pieces to the application. And the essays are really the only part that you can exert 100% control over. You can put in a great amount of effort and you can feel really good about it. You can't fully control your GPA, right? You might have a teacher that's just terrible and you can't get your grade up. You can't really control your ACT and SAT score. Yes, you can study, but you don't know exactly where that's going to lead you. You can't really control your recommendations because someone else is writing it, etc. But your essays you really can control. The essays also give you an opportunity to tell more about yourself, about your values, your character, and your personality. And they also help you differentiate yourself from other people, right? Your stories are only your stories. Other people don't have those stories. And that's really, really important in the application process. The last point here, I think, is really key. Your essays really rarely talk about one piece of you, but they tie together varying pieces of you. You're basically making a quilt of your life in some of these essays and pulling together different pieces. Sometimes it's hard to see how those pieces fit together, but something that I want to really reinforce tonight is they can fit together. And that's what I want to teach you how to do. Okay, so in terms of a timeline, right? It's March. A lot of these applications aren't going to be due until September, October, November, December, January, but it's not too early to begin. First of all, you're a junior now, and junior year is incredibly busy. Senior year is double that. There's a social aspect, there's an academic aspect, there's just, oh my God, this is my last year in school aspect. So it's very busy. Starting right now puts you ahead of the curve. So by the time you finish school in May or June, you might be really ready to sit down and start writing these. And if you could get a lot of your essays done over the summer, that would put you way, way ahead of your peers. And some schools are what it's called rolling admission, meaning you can apply at any time and they'll look at applications when they come in. There's not necessarily a set deadline. So that would really put you ahead of the curve. Some schools have early decision or early action deadlines that are in early November. Some could be sooner than that. And the regular decision deadlines aren't far behind. Many are either December 1st, December 15th, or January 1st, okay? What do we think is ideal in terms of timeline? Well, you have to keep in your head that the common application essay is going to take you the longest. And we think it could probably take about 4 to 6 weeks to pull together, but it might not be perfect after 4 to 6 weeks. You still might need some time to revise it, so know that. You also then need to do the supplemental essays. Many schools have supplemental essays. Some might focus on, why do you like this school? They might ask you about activities that you've been involved in. So there's lots of different things that the supplemental essays could cover. This last line, again, very important. Rushed essays feel rushed. If you're scribbling to the last second, it's going to feel like you haven't read it over and you haven't thought about it. So it's March now. That's why we want you to start thinking about it. Okay, so here we go. So the first thing that I think is best to do, and this is getting a little bit ahead because many of the colleges haven't released their supplemental essays yet, but the common application essays are going to be the same this year as they were last year. So first include the common app topics, which there's usually 7 different prompts. And they're about personal stories, setbacks or failures, life challenges, etc. And then as the schools release their supplemental essays, you can start filling those in. Again, I was talking about why our school, or a personal interest, or a personal leadership story. So at least in this spreadsheet, you know what the topics are, and you could start seeing where there might be crossover. Like maybe, and I'm just making this up, maybe Tulane has a question about a favorite book, and so does Emory. And so you're like, all right, I know those 2 schools have a very similar question. I can kind of repurpose the same essay. So that would work out great. A lot of schools have personal leadership stories, so that might be something. Here is just a list of the common application questions. I'm not going to read over every one. You can easily Google that, but this should be something you should start looking at. Again, we're starting to think. That's what this exercise is all about. We're just starting to think about topics. And so we want to see, oh, what's something like, oh, do I have an accomplishment that sparked a period of personal growth? Oh, maybe I do. That time I did this. So your brain starts working. Maybe there's something that you faced a setback and you want to write about that and how you overcame it. The supplemental essays, as I mentioned, most of the schools have not released them, but they're very, very varied. And that's why the spreadsheet is so important. So you really know, again, what you're going to have to tackle. Some of these that are listed here, excuse me, are quite difficult. And so they're going to take some time to pull together. Others are much more simplified. But you want to know, if I'm applying to Dartmouth and I'm going to have to write something, relating to this, you can't use a creativity quote. You want that to be on your mind as you're brainstorming ideas. So let's go through some of the practical steps to start brainstorming your ideas. And the first thing that I would do would be just to start thinking about the ideas. We'll eventually want you to write them down, but just start, and that's again what tonight's all about. I'm just going to spend like the next few weeks thinking, what are my ideas? And then start building a file. I know everybody wants to like do it on their phone, and that might be an initially good place to begin, but you can't really write that much in your phone. So on your computer, create a file where you can just start jotting down notes. And this is not going to happen, if mom's like, you watch that presentation, I want you to write down your ideas. Like, this isn't a 2-hour exercise. This is something that you're going to work on over the next few weeks, where you're going to start jotting ideas down. Eventually they're going to create this quote unquote brainstorming document. You're going to be really happy you've pulled this together once you do this. So we're creating this brainstorming roadmap. First, start with the broad topics, right? These are my activities. These are my extracurriculars. These are the things that I really enjoy doing. These are things I'm passionate about. So if you kind of take that very high level view, and then you start going deeper, and you step back and you say, okay, so I really like this activity. What did I get out of this activity? How did I grow from this activity? What did I learn about myself from this activity? Was there a setback? Was there an accomplishment in my participation? You know, what were the interpersonal skills that I had when I was in this activity? Why is this even important to me? What have I learned from it? You know, so if you just go through these kinds of questions, you'll really start building a great document of your stories. And I think that will be very, very, very useful to you as you begin to build this roadmap. Okay, so we're going to start with Jim. Jim is a 4-year lacrosse player, and he got on varsity when he was a junior. Okay, so on the surface, like lacrosse player, he's a good team member, and he was able to reach his goals through practice and determination. Like, I think many of you probably could write that down, right? Like, I'm on soccer and I'm a good, you know, like I play baseball, whatever it is. That works out perfectly fine. Now let's step back and think Jim. Okay, Jim, he has some better stories. Once he sat down and started answering those questions, he really started thinking about things more deeply. So first of all, he helped mentor a freshman player who was struggling to fit in with the team. And he became this guy's like de facto big brother. He spent time with him at a practice, helping him learn skills. And then he was so proud when this freshman ended up getting to play JV by the end of the season. And he probably will secure a JV spot in his sophomore year. So Jim really, that was a really important experience during high school. It shows this compassion, empathy, kindness. Like, those are really strong traits that he showed. Remember my previous slide? He's a team member and he reached his own goals. Like, that's very one-dimensional. This is multi-dimensional. This is really getting into what Jim was able to do. Jim also had his own growth. He was frustrated with making varsity or being on the varsity roster, but he wasn't playing a single game his sophomore year. So he got to work. He practiced and practiced and practiced, and he ended up starting varsity his junior year. And he was so proud of that effort. So those traits are perseverance and determination. Again, it goes from this slide, which is just like he reached his goal through practice and determination, to this really good story of a kid who literally dented his garage from throwing the ball over and over again. So you can see how Jim's story really lifts off the page. We'll turn to this AP Physics winner story too, which again, teamwork. You know, teamwork sounds great, but it's kind of, what's teamwork? We want to give more to it. And it also shows that he has this strong quant proficiency. So he's somebody who's good with numbers, all right? So that's kind of like the headline, but what's the story behind the story? So first of all, we'll call him Bill. I should have had one as a woman and one as a man, but we'll call him Bill. So he was the only junior on this physics Olympics team, including 3 seniors with extreme senioritis. Like, they didn't want to do anything, but he really wanted to participate. So he figured out ways to engage these other team members. He planned lunches at places like Chipotle to woo them there. He gave them choices on what parts to take, and the end result was they won. So he did a really good job facilitating, organizing, and it shows determination. He didn't just let these 3 seniors who didn't want to do anything do nothing. He got them connected and they ended up winning. They were also really struggling he was struggling to develop the idea for the contest, and he kept building these prototypes and they failed, and he walked away from the project and he came back to it and he figured out what was wrong, and ultimately this was the winning prototype. And this shows determination, perseverance, and creativity. So it wasn't just that he was on a team and the team won. There are 2 really good stories here behind, right? You're like, I don't know if you guys ever heard the line peeling the onion, but you keep peeling it back and there's a lot of layers in an onion. That's what you're doing in these essays. Other ideas to consider when brainstorming: you know, have you ever struggled with something and then succeeded? What made you successful? Have you struggled and not succeeded? What do you think is your strongest personality trait, and what stories connect with that? what do your friends say about you? Sometimes people see things in you that you don't even see in yourself. Have you ever had to overcome something in your life, and what are you most proud of? So are there any questions that you might have on this up till now?
Rachel, I think one question, we haven't had any come in on the chat yet, but I think one question that I'd like to ask before we jump too far ahead is, what are some of the most common mistakes people make on the essay, and what are some tips to avoiding those you have?
I think one of the biggest mistakes is they don't show in their essays any self-reflection or self-awareness. They tell stories that are somewhat flat, like I'm a good team member versus I'm a good team member because I mentored somebody who really needed mentorship. And I realized that this player had promised he just needed somebody to pay a little attention to him, right? So that's the ability to have some self-reflection and self-awareness. So I think that that's something that a lot of college applicants fail to do. They also want to tell one story, and as we go on in the slides, I'll show how to connect stories together. A lot of college applicants see it as, I'm just going to tell this one thing about me, versus think how that one thing represents a lot of different stories in their life.
Got it. All right, let's continue on. Let's see what else there is.
Good. Okay, so where does this brainstorming lead you? So we're going to go through an example now, and I hope it really helps you see how you can connect stories together. Oh, you see I have another Jimmy here. I forgot that I forgot I named this guy Jimmy too. I don't even have a Jimmy in my life, but okay. So on the surface, this Jimmy is president of the Health and Fitness Club. He has a lead in the spring musical. He's a volunteer at the local food bank, and he's an avid hiker. Okay, so remember at the beginning of this presentation, like 10 minutes ago, I said, just start writing down your activities and your interests. So that's what Jimmy did. He just wrote these things down. But now let's kind of see what's behind this. I get very excited here. Okay, so first of all, he's the Health and Fitness Club president. This is a new club. He built this club from 0 to 100 people in the first year. It's very notable. Okay, so that's important. He was able to partner with local fitness companies to offer students access to discounted exercise classes. He conducted this lunchtime salad challenge for 2 weeks and started a weekly yoga class after school. So he's done a lot just in that. He was in the spring musical as one of the leads. He spent his time freshman and sophomore year on the ensemble cast and then moved up to a leading role in the junior year. He helped establish camaraderie among the cast, organizing weekend outings to get people connected. And he devised a way to bolster the show by raffling off front row seats to all the shows. So that really helped their budget. He also volunteered at a food bank. So he helped organize donations of non-perishables. And he took in incoming donations. And he actually also built a new outlet to get donations with scout groups who began donating. And he loves hiking, and he has spent some of his free time tackling some of the toughest hikes in the immediate area, and he volunteers as a guide a few times a year, and he also helps friends who are fearful of heights overcome their apprehension. So this is Jimmy, and he has a lot of good things in his profile. So now let's think, what are we going to do with all of this? Because I'm sure a lot of you have similar things, right? You have a lot of different stories, but how do you pull them all together? Because you can't say it all. So you have to figure out, how am I going to optimize and strategize? So this is the Common App essay prompt number 1. And this was the most popular one. We don't know what the most popular one was for last year, but this was for 2 seasons ago. Some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that is so meaningful, they believe their application would be incomplete without it. If this sounds like you, please share your story. So this is a 650-word maximum essay. So don't try and hand in more, but this is a very, very popular prompt. So let's start with a potential approach. Focus on a theme. Okay, we're going to give you 3 different approaches here that you could use for this essay. Focus on a theme. It's not cliche if you actually have stories to back it up, right? It's cliche if you don't have anything. The theme is not really applicable to your stories. But if you have the stories to back it up, then it works. this isn't a list, right? This isn't like, I did this, I did this, I did this. This is, you're trying to write something that the person who's reading it wants to listen to, or wants to read from the first line to the last line. That's something important. So keep that in mind. So with Jimmy, we might use the theme taking initiative. He did founded the club and partnered with the local fitness companies. He bolstered the school's show budget with the raffled off seats. He developed this new outlet for donations at the food bank, and he helped friends who were fearful of heights overcome their apprehension, right? Those are great examples of taking initiative. So by using that theme, taking initiative, he's going to tell the colleges a lot about himself, and really, really strong stories that represent leadership, okay? Without saying, I'm a leader, he's really saying, look at these stories, they show initiative. Initiative represents leadership, and business schools. Colleges really, really care a lot about people who are going to be future leaders. So keep that in mind. Now, you might also want to discuss an individual accomplishment. There might be a very strong story within your profile, and you want to be able to tell that individual accomplishment. So in the case of Jimmy, he went from just volunteering at the food bank to developing new outlets for donations. He worked with these scout troops to develop programs to gain the new donations, and he was able to double the intake of donations over 10 weeks, including during the holiday season. So there's real impact there to write about, and why this is important. So he wouldn't just write, I did this, but why this was such an important thing for him to do and what he got out of it. Remember I said a few minutes ago, you want to be able to show self-reflection and self-awareness. Well, that's exactly what he would show in this essay, that this was really meaningful to him. Approach number 3 could be discussing a personal journey, where you weave together maybe 1, 2, or 3 mini stories that reveal your values. You might focus on inflection points in your life, or where your perspective shifted. This is about a lot of self-expression. So in this example, maybe Jimmy talks about the fact that his father had faced this health condition during his childhood, and Jimmy, as a result, became very, very focused on having a healthy lifestyle. So he saw a demand for the health and fitness club at school, and he took the initiative to create it. He had to go to the Board of Ed to get it approved. He developed a recruitment plan. He was able to get 100 students in the club in the first year. He built the relationships with the local fitness companies, and he ended up helping friends get in shape. That's kind of like the end result, the real impact. So that's a potential great essay as well. So my point in all of this is that I want you to see there's a lot of different pathways you can take, but it's really important at first to write down what you have. You can never get to approach 1, 2, or 3 if you haven't done the work to just sit down and write who you are down on paper, right? These are my stories. This is what I'm involved in. This is why it's meaningful to me. That's important. So do we have any questions here?
Yeah, we've got a couple questions that came in, and I'll hit the first one because it kind of hits upon what you just ended talking about with taking the personal approach. So one of the questions is one that I think gets a lot of play, especially at the MBA level, is how do you balance between getting too emotional or personal in the essay? What is there something that you can go too far, and just how do you hit that balance?
Well, most people don't have they don't have that, oh my God, the parting of the Red Sea. They don't have that story. But they probably have things in their life that were really meaningful to them, and those inflection points where I learned something about myself at that moment, and that really changed how I behaved going forward. So I think that you can bring some emotion into it without being sappy, or you don't want the reader to be crying, because most of those stories aren't really worth crying over. So I think there's a fine line, but you might have an impactful story of something that you've experienced that you want to write about that's really meaningful to you, right? That's like, I overcame this, or I've come up against this, and it has changed me. And I'm not against those stories. You just don't want it to be a sob story. So I think that that's where the fine line is.
And then one more that I'd like to ask is, we've got a question about, are there any cliche stories that you think get overplayed in this college admissions process?
You know, I get asked that question a lot. And I always say, like, as long as you're writing stories that are true to you, and you're not, I can't stand when people say, well, I looked up essays that were written by other people who got in, and they wrote about this like great story about a girl who went to Costco with her mom. And I don't know if you've seen that as college essay, but I've probably gotten that question 10 times. Well, that's a cliche. Like, that person did that successfully, and no one else will ever be able to write that ever again. So if you're true to your stories, and again, those inflection points that really changed you and helped you see things differently or position yourself differently or learn from, then you'll never sound like a cliche. And you want to avoid, you know, cliches, but if you're telling your own stories, then they shouldn't be cliche.
All right, so no Costco stories then.
No,
Let's move on to the next section.
Now everybody's going to go like try and find that one online. Okay, so I'm going to move on to writing effective essays. So the term essay is kind of a misnomer, because a lot of people, when they hear essays, they're thinking like a high school essay where you have to like prove a fact. It's like, I had to write this history essay, and that's not what we want you to do. We're really asking you to write a narrative. A narrative is about your life and your experiences, and it's really comes from you. It's much more readable. Like, an essay has an opening paragraph and then 3 body paragraphs and then a closing paragraph. That's not what a college essay is. A college essay is a story about you. And so when I was talking about those approaches before, you don't have to write the essay and say like, my college essay is going to be about taking initiative. I took initiative doing this, I took initiative doing this, and I took initiative doing that. No, you could begin with a story of you taking initiative, and then you could then use other stories to show this idea of taking initiative. I hope that made sense. So let's say you have an essay idea, right? You're okay, I think I know what I want to write about. Don't just start writing. First of all, organize your ideas, put them into an outline form, sit on it for a day or two, think, does it make sense? You can start writing, and you don't have to pay attention to the word count. Yeah, I said for the Common App essay, it has to be 650 words. Don't worry about that on the first draft. Start writing, see how this starts coming together. Keep looking at your outline, thinking, is this working? Could I bring in another story? Is the stories that I have, are they good enough? Then revise it and revise it and revise it. Am I answering the question? Did I leave out something? I'm a very, very, very big person about reading things out loud. When you hear your words, you think differently. I was a journalist for almost 20 years, and I would say every time I wrote a story, I read it out loud before I handed it in, because I wanted to be able to hear my writing, and it made a big difference. You also catch a lot of mistakes when you read things out loud. Once you feel that the content is where you want it to be, then you got to start doing the cutting. Cut, get it down to that word count. Just because they're asking for 650 words doesn't mean you have to write 650 words. So know that if you handed in 500 words, you would be okay. They're just saying to you the maximum is 650. Then when you think you have a good draft in order, walk away, do something else, work on the supplemental essays, come back to it. You want to give yourself some breathing room. I talk about fresh eyes all the time, like that idea of fresh eyes. When you go back and look at something, and this is in school too, if you write something and you go back and look at it, you will see changes that you need to make. Some writing tips that I think are very important, this is really from my years of being a professional writer, is first and foremost, show, don't tell. use examples to highlight traits. So you don't want to say, I'm an initiator. You want to use stories that show you initiated to convey that strength. Write like you speak. Okay, simple is better. Think of sentences that are 10 words or less. If you wrote your essays just with sentences 10 words or less, your essays would be 10 times better than these long, winding, comma, sentences that seem to lead to nowhere. So, and use words and phrases that reflect you. Like, if you're somebody who doesn't have this vast vocabulary, which most high school students don't, that's fine. You want to write in a way that's very accessible to the reader. You want the people from the admissions committee to hear you in your essay. Embrace conflicts and setbacks. A lot of applicants think, oh, I don't want to write about that because it sounds bad. No, failure's okay. If you faced a challenge and you had to overcome it, that's okay. That's great content for an essay. And remember, conflict doesn't have to involve confrontation, but you have to kind of show these opposing forces that come together. And I think a lot of applicants don't understand that. And you also want to kind of find your narrative voice. And here's two examples. So the first example here for the same topic is, I deeply enjoy photography and I'm constantly striving for that right shot. I'm remarkably persistent in my quest. From experience, I know that I have it in me to wait long periods for a cloud to pass or for an obstruction to move before I start clicking that camera. So that's very tell. Remember, we're talking about show, not tell. So that was very tell. Now we'll turn to the show. The perfect photo. Is there ever one? I frequently find myself looking for the right shot, waiting for the cloud to pass, rotating a bit to remove an obstruction, kneeling on the ground to get a better angle. I sit patiently until I've got the shot. Click, click, click. So you really feel like you're kind of drawn into the applicant's story in the second one because they're using more detail than they did in the first one. The first one is written much more academically. The second one is, oh, I want to know more about this person. Same with this. I empathize with any stutterer because I am one myself. I know the fear and shame that comes with the feeling that I may never be fully understood. I have been challenged in classes in which I have to participate, often lamenting, can I get the words out? Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. But either way, it's never easy. Again, that's a lot of tell. You know from word 5 that this applicant has a stutter, but we're not sure where it's taking us. So this one is a lot more show. The teacher is surveying the class and a dozen hands are raised. I know the answer. My mind races. Can I get the words out? I ask myself. No one can hear these words resounding through my head, but I often repeat them. I know I have to participate in class discussions because that's part of my grade, but I can't. Nothing will slip off my tongue. Fear paralyzes me. Now you're wondering what happened with this applicant, right? You want to keep reading more versus the wishy-washy. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. You want as the reader to know more. So that's something important to keep in mind as you're building your narrative story. This I snuck in here because I think it's important. And I bet a lot of people are going to have questions on this, just why school, and I'll get to that in a second. But a lot of schools ask you why you want to go to their school. And sometimes it's a very short essay, 150 words. Sometimes it's 250, sometimes it's 400. So you need to really research the school and you need to put some emphasis on the academics, that you actually know what you want to get out of the academic experience. You definitely want to highlight something about the culture and the community. Maybe it's the diversity on campus. Maybe it's where students spend their free time. Maybe it's the extracurricular activities. You don't want to just say, like, we have this very generic statement here. I'm so excited to go to Tufts because it's awesome engineering program. That doesn't tell the reader anything. You want to be able to tell them a lot more about why this engineering program is so awesome. And you might want to also connect your past to your future. Maybe we're in student government in high school and you want to really get involved. They have a very, very active student government association in college, and you want to be part of that. Now, I assume that many of you are thinking about visiting schools, but because of the current world events, many of the schools are closed and that's not really an option. There's a lot of different ways that you can research your schools through the internet. There's a lot, the schools have great resources on their websites. This is a great time to try and connect up with people who go to these schools. If you have a friend or friend of friend, whatever it is, through social media, try and talk to people who are going to those schools and ask them, what is it like? What's the community like? How do you spend your weekends? What's the diversity on campus, et cetera? That will really help you. Every school has a list of extracurricular activities. They, hundreds of them. See what really stands out. So it's hard to not visit schools. First of all, you would never be able to visit all the schools you're applying to, but it's hard not to visit some. But you can do a lot of great research. So know that. So I wanted to show you kind of two different ways to the why school. So Lehigh had this question last year, which is, what about Lehigh piques your intellectual curiosity? So the first one is, Lehigh University seems like the right fit for me because it offers so much academically and experientially. From talking with students on campus and a disproportionate number of adults in my life who are alumni, I see how Lehigh will help me achieve my goal of expanding my knowledge, not only in my major, but across different disciplines. So that is very vague. It's not specific at all. It's like, Lehigh is a really great place and I'm going to learn a lot and it's going to be great. That's the way I read that one. So this one is a little more dynamic. When I visited campus, the students I met told me excitedly about the hands-on projects they regularly complete and the internship and co-op opportunities they are looking forward to do. I believe such experiences would prepare me to effectively apply what I learned in the classroom to real-world situations and truly make positive contributions. I'm fortunate to know several Lehigh alumni, and they've always spoken highly about the university's core values of academic freedom, collaboration, and intellectual curiosity. So this shows that the applicant really put in some time to do research on the school. And yes, this applicant visited campus, but he could have taken that out given the current event that's going on in the world and just said, like, the students I talked to, and it would still pack a punch. Any questions that we have up until this point?
Yeah, we've got a few. I'll hit first upon that last point that you made about getting specific. We have one asking about essentially how specific should applicants get whenever they're writing these? Is mentioning maybe classes or professors a good idea, or is that too specific?
Well, you absolutely, if there's a class that really excites you, you absolutely could write about it. If there's a professor that you're dying to take, you absolutely could write about it. Again, the range of words that the schools allow is very wide. So if you have a 500-word essay, you can fit in a lot of good granular detail. If you have a 150-word essay, you might have to speak a little bit more broadly, but still use specifics. You never want to write a why school essay and just say, like, I went to a football game and I loved the school spirit. Like, that is not the essay that the schools want to read. They want to think, why do you want to be part of our community? What are you going to add to the community, and what can this community do for you? So really try to steer clear of those, and school spirit is important, but it's not the only thing. Last year, the head of our company and I would joke around how many essays we had with football game references in it. I mean, it was just, we were like, nobody's going to get in if they're just talking about football. So just know that.
And a follow-up on that, how important is it to indicate what sort of major you're interested in? Is that something that should pop up, or is that something that you can kind of indicate in other parts of the application?
You really need to read through the applications to see what is required in other places. Some schools will ask you somewhat specifically in a why school essay to say where the area of interest for academics that you have. You might not know exactly what you want to do, but that might mean you're saying, I want to apply to the arts and sciences school, and this is something that I am potentially interested in. Like, let's say you're somebody who's interested in politics. Well, you're not sure you want to be a poli-sci major. You might want to do international relations. You might want to do journalism. So there might be a lot of different pathways, and you're kind of waiting till you get to college to make that decision, and that's okay too. But you should have an idea of kind of where you're going to center your studies in some ways, which allows you to be a little bit more vague.
Got it. Okay. We have a couple more, but I've seen the slides and I have a feeling you might answer them before we get there. So let's move on and we'll readdress them if you don't.
So now we're going to just do a quick read through of two essays, and we're not going to spend like endless amount of time here, but I wanted you to kind of see, we had touched on the tops of both of these essays previously, and I wanted you to be able to read the full essays, and I'd love to hear a little bit of feedback about it. So just remember, every applicant has his or her story. Every applicant has their own voice and experience reflected in their essays. No one is superhuman, and you might love these essays and you might hate these essays, and that's okay. I won't take any sides, but just remember that they're written by your peers essentially. So they're not, they don't have to be perfect, right? And I know somebody was asking a question like, what if my grammar's wrong? You're teenagers, that's okay. You don't want to have an essay that's littered with grammatical mistakes, but if you spell a word wrong or you have a one grammatical or two grammatical errors, no one's going to say, forget it, they're not getting into this school. So just note that. So here's the first essay, which is answering the first question from the Common App. And I ask you to read this. I'll take just like a minute, read this over, and then I'll take, see what anybody thinks about this, or maybe I'll lead this conversation. So go ahead and read this. I'm going to jump to this next page. Okay, just for the sake of time, because I want to be able to take some questions at the end of the presentation. So what I loved about this essay is that the author got to use what we call in writing a device. So her photography was the device, right? And she used the different lenses that she put on her camera as a way to kind of tell these different stories about herself, and using photography as this way, like, how do I capture moments in my life? And how do I look at things from different angles? So you got to see the AP biology story. You got to hear that she had worked her way to go on this trip to California to visit Yosemite and etc. She's somebody who likes rock climbing or treetop courses, zip lines, and skiing. So she gets to pull in those things. And I thought that this was a great way to tell a lot about her. And it was a creative essay without being in your face creative. I don't know if you guys feel that way. Just some quick comments. If anybody has some quick comments on this one, I'd like to hear them. That would be great. Anyone? Really? You think she uses the word I a lot? I don't think she has that many sentences that actually begin with the word I, because that's one of my big touch points, that I don't like I, but yeah, maybe. But I think that I think overusing I isn't great, but I don't feel that she overused it. Now, of course, yeah, I think it's a good read. She got an early decision at her first choice school. So there you have it. All right, let's move on to the next one, just because I think it's nice for you to see. So this essay relates to the obstacle question in the Common App. So like, lessons we take from obstacles we encounter can be fundamental to later success. Recount a time when you faced a challenge, setback, or failure. How did it affect you, and how did you learn from the experience? So take a minute just to read this over. Okay, I'm going to just jump to the next one. So any thoughts on this one? I'd love to hear any thoughts on this one. So what I liked about this one a lot was it really showed a setback, and how the individual tried to really turn things around from that setback. Yes, somebody wrote it's very human. It was really human, but it was also that self-reflection that and awareness that really came out in this essay. Because as we see in the first paragraph here, most notably, I learned to be patient and appreciate difficulties that others might have. And also, having a stutter helped me become a better listener. Now, remember, we go back to the multidimensional brainstorming where we're like laying out our stories, and this young man was talking about um, this youth group retreat, and where he told me this story. And it wasn't until we started pulling together this essay that the pieces started to fit together. Like, it wasn't clear that he had become a better listener until we really were hashing out the whole struggle he had with stuttering, and he said it made him become a better listener, and then it kind of connected so nicely with this other story from the youth group retreat. So this is the importance of kind of laying all your stories out, because you don't know where the puzzle pieces are exactly going to line up. And I think they lined up very nicely. And so I like that a lot. Okay, so there we have it. So quickly, I'll finish up, and then any questions that you might have, I'd love to hear from you. Just a little bit about collegeMission. As I said before, I'm very, very experienced in helping people work on their college applications, and our whole team are industry veterans who have decades of admissions consulting experience. We're kind of based in the MBA world with a lot of college experience as well. We really help our clients We serve as their mentor, their coach, their partner, so their parents don't have to be those things during what can be a very trying period in high school life, and we understand that. And so all of us have gone to school, business school, as well as undergrad. All of us have writing experience and editing experience as well. And we have different services that you can find on our website, from all kind of building off the Common App and then going into the supplemental essays as well. If you want to reach us, info@collegemission.com. And you can find our website at www.collegemission.com. I want to also thank Poets&Quants for hosting tonight, because we couldn't do it without them. Thank you, thank you. Okay, tell me your questions. We can take some. Nathan, what should we do?
So I'll jump in and I'll ask one first while some people put some more up. One thing I'm wondering is, just in terms of doing an edit and having somebody look at it, who do you recommend having look at your college essay? That would be a good distance, maybe your parents are too close. What recommendations do you have there?
Outside of me, of course, just joking. Sometimes people ask their English teacher to read over their college essay, maybe an older sibling or older cousin, somebody who's been through the process before. Obviously, your parents are not a terrible idea. They might be a great starting point, and then you want others to look at it. But I also am not a big fan of having 5 people read it, because 5 people reading it, everybody's going to have a different viewpoint. Everyone's going to be like, well, when I applied to college, we didn't do it this way. Or at my school, they don't like this. So sometimes I feel like if you have 1 or 2 people that you're going to say, these are my people I'm going to, go with, then go with them. But don't pass it around. And I don't really recommend you passing it around to your peers, just because I don't think that most peers give honest feedback. And by the way, if you're sharing it with family members or friends or whoever you're doing, or your English teacher, you have to be willing to take the feedback. So that's, if you're asking for feedback, then be willing to accept that it's being given.
And for those who might not have anybody that can take a look at it whenever they need to take a look at it, what are some self-edit tips that you have? I've always heard to read it out loud to yourself. Yeah. And you can catch a lot of things that way. Do you have any other self-edit tips for some of the students?
I think reading out loud is the #1 thing to do, because you're listening to your story and walking away and coming back to things. So sorry, that's my dog choking behind me. So if you're not sure why she's choking, but if you are able to walk away and come back with fresh eyes, you will see things and hear things that you missed before.
Right. Okay. And then you'll just have to cut us off whenever we've hit the time. But I've got a couple more, it looks like, that are coming in. So we've got one that's asking about, how do you kind of hit that balance of talking about accomplishments, but not sounding like you're boasting or humble bragging?
I think that you're not just when you talk about accomplishments, you have to tell stories, because there's no accomplishment that happened without kind of the climb to get there. So I think telling the story behind what fueled your success. Most accomplishments don't just happen straight up, right? There's usually setbacks. So if you're going to talk about accomplishments, talk about those setbacks, or really make it a story of what you put in, because then it doesn't sound like you're bragging. Then it sounds like, I really put in a lot to make this happen in my life. And that's a lot stronger than, I placed first. Like, no one wants to read that. They want to hear the story behind the story.
And then on the other end, we had a question a little higher up in the chat that we kind of skipped over, but I want to circle back to it. It was asking about addressing failures or setbacks. How do you do that without, sounding just too much like, how do you find that balance of failure and spinning it to a positive?
You just broke up a little bit, so I'm not sure what you said exactly, but I think you're asking me for the how do you address like a failure or a setback. Like
Yeah.
this essay we just did was a setback essay in a lot of ways and an accomplishment essay in a lot of ways, right? Like here was a young man who overcame a lot, but then he had this huge setback in this really impressionable moment in his life called middle school that he developed this horrible stutter. So that was a setback essay. I really like setback essays and failure essays, especially if you grow from the setback or the failure, and then you're able to show like, I was resilient, I was able to come back, and this is how I did it, and this is how I applied this to other parts in my life. So like a setback for somebody could be no longer being able to play the sport that they had practiced for 10 years. Like that could be a story, and having to rethink of who they were. That can be a powerful story to write in an essay. It doesn't have to be like a failure that's so monumental, earth cracks in half. Now, these have to be relatable failures to you as a person who's underage, 17 or 18.
Got it. Okay. And then lastly, just with things that are going on right now with the SAT recently canceled for May, how much emphasis do you think should be put on the college essay versus before? And how do you see that kind of trending as, the uncertainty around the SAT just continues?
This is like very uncertain times. Like we're not really sure what's going to happen because, these testing centers are not allowing tests right now. I have always thought that the essay plays a role in this process, because if they were just looking at people based on scores, then it would just be, we're only taking people with, a 36 ACT and a 4.5 GPA, and we'll take only those top people and we won't take anybody else. But we know that doesn't happen. And we know that there's great variability at a lot of different schools. So this is your only chance to tell your stories that aren't going to be like on the flat page. Like if you think of your application, it's one dimensional. It's just telling, these are the activities I do, these are my grades, these are my scores. The essay is multidimensional. This is where I get to tell a bit about who I am, that they won't read anywhere else. And that's really, really, really important. I see a question in the chat that I just want to touch on. Like somebody was asking about a mission trip isn't a good topic to talk about in an essay. It's not a bad topic to talk about. You're not writing about the mission trip. You're talking about the change in you that happened from that trip. So if you reframe the way you ask that question, like, are mission trips a good topic? No, just because you went on the trip doesn't matter. But if it changed you as a person, and then you took that learning and applied it to other places in your life, then it's a fine topic. So it's not so black and white in terms of what's okay and what's not okay. Always think, what did I learn from it and how did I change? And if you think about that all the time, that will really help you write compelling essays.
Excellent. All right. Well, I think those are the questions, and it looks like we're at an hour now.
Yeah.
So Rachel, thanks so much. You can find her and her team at www.collegemission.com. And we're poetsandquants.com. So thanks again, Rachel, and stay healthy and have a good night.
Everyone stay healthy. Take care.
Thanks.